What would you do if you found a little girl in the snow, clutching a letter to a father who never came, and a dog who refused to leave her side? It was the kind of night that made your bones ache, wind howling through the trees like a warning, cold biting through walls like regret. In the far corner of Harper's Hollow, tucked deep in the fields of upstate New York, an old ranch stood silent under the bruised sky. No visitors, no lights, just one man, one dog, and the memory of everything they'd lost. Jack Callahan was a man carved by time and war. 60 years old, silver-haired, shoulders broad, but slightly slumped shrapnel from his last tour in Afghanistan still pulled him crooked. He didn't complain, didn't talk much about the military or about Margaret, the woman he buried 3 winters ago. Now he lived alone with his dog Shadow, a retired K9 who had once saved lives in lands too far to pronounce and too harsh to forget. That night, Jack stood at the kitchen sink with a chipped mug of coffee in one hand, the other resting on the windowsill. The fire crackled in the background. The house was warm, but something felt off. Shadow hadn't moved in hours. The old German shepherd sat like a statue on the porch, ears pricked, eyes locked on the barn across the yard, an old sagging structure of faded red boards and broken hinges. It hadn't been used in years, not since Margaret passed and Jack let the last of the horses go. But tonight, Shadow was tense. Still. Watching, Jack noticed. Still staring at that old barn, he muttered, mostly to himself. But his voice didn't carry its usual grumble. It was softer, touched by something he couldn't name. Shadow's ears twitched. He didn't look back. Jack set the mug down, shrugged on his jacket, and stepped into the wind. The grass beneath his boots crackled with frost. The barn loomed ahead like a forgotten memory, ribs exposed, roof sagging like a tired sigh. The air changed as he got closer, the kind of shift you feel in your gut before your mind catches up. "Shadow," Jack said quietly. "What is it, boy?" The dog let out a low growl, not angry but urgent. Then, without waiting, he trotted across the yard toward the barn, his tail level, his pace steady. Jack followed, one hand gripping the flashlight he always kept by the door, the other brushing the utility knife on his belt. Old habits. Muscle memory. Something told him this wasn't nothing. The barn door creaked open, screaming on rusted hinges. Shadow stopped at the threshold, waiting, ears tilted forward. Jack stepped inside. The cold hit harder here, like the walls couldn't hold in anything anymore. The smell was thick, old straw, rust, damp wood, and something else. Something faint but wrong. Rot. Maybe mold. Maybe fear. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching on hay bales, rusted tools, spider webs thick like wire. Nothing moved, but Shadow didn't relax. Jack swept the light across the floor. That's when he heard it, a sound so soft it barely counted as noise, a shuffle, like fabric brushing wood. Then the faintest sniff, like someone holding back a sob. He stepped forward, heartbeat suddenly too loud in his ears. Behind a stack of feed sacks, the beam of his flashlight caught something that didn't belong. A shape small, hunched, still. Shadow let out a sound Jack hadn't heard since Bosnia. Not a bark. Not a growl. A low, mournful whine. The sound of knowing something bad was near, and being too late to stop it. Jack's hands trembled as he moved closer. The shape was a child. A little girl, maybe 6, curled into herself like a wounded animal. Her dress was pink, or had been once, now stained and torn. Her hair, long and tangled, draped across her face. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, cheeks streaked with dirt. She didn't move. Not at first. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jack whispered, crouching down, his voice barely more than breath. She flinched. Shadow stepped closer and sat beside her, lowering his head. The girl stirred, opened one eye glazed, unfocused, and tried to pull away, but she was too weak. Her body was limp, like she'd been emptied out and forgotten. Jack pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. Her bones felt like bird wings, so light, so fragile. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now. I've got you." He lifted her into his arms, her head resting against his chest like it belonged there. Shadow trotted ahead toward the truck, tail high, eyes scanning the darkness. Jack didn't remember starting the engine. He didn't remember the drive into town. All he remembered was the silence in the cab, the way she didn't make a sound. Not a word, not a tear. Just a soft breath against his collar. At St. Mary's Hospital, the emergency staff moved fast. The girl, no ID, no name, was taken into pediatric care. Shadow wasn't allowed past the front doors, but he waited in the hallway, pacing, ears twitching every time someone passed. Jack sat outside the room, hat in hand, staring at the floor like it might give him answers. An hour later, a pediatrician came out, mid-30s, steady voice, sharp eyes. His name was Dr. Logan Pierce. "She's stable now," he said, "severely dehydrated. Hypothermic, malnourished, but no internal injuries." "You got her here in time." Jack nodded, swallowed. "Did she say anything, Doctor?" Pierce hesitated. "Her name is Emily. She asked about your dog, Shadow." Jack blinked. "She remembers him? Said he stayed with her, watched her sleep." There was a pause. "She also said she was hiding from someone named Evelyn." Jack's fists clenched. "She said, 'I don't like her. She yells. I hide in the barn so she won't find me.'" Dr. Pierce's voice was low. "She's afraid of going back." Jack stood quietly. His breath slow, his eyes heavy. He'd seen kids like this before. In war zones, refugee camps, but never this close to home. He looked at the door where Emily now slept, alone, wrapped in borrowed blankets, no one coming for her, except maybe him. And the dog who heard her first. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and the faint spill of hallway light through a cracked door. Machines hummed gently. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulsed like a lullaby in the dark. Emily Callahan lay still in the bed, her small frame nearly swallowed by the blankets. Her cheeks were pale, her lips dry, and her tiny hands rested on top of the sheets, bruises faint but visible beneath the fluorescent light. She hadn't spoken since being admitted. She hadn't cried. She hadn't asked for anyone except the dog, Shadow. He lay curled just outside the door, unmoving, his head resting between his paws, his ears twitching at every passing footstep. The nurses had given up trying to keep him away. He wasn't going anywhere. Not until she smiled again. Jack sat in the waiting area down the hall, his hat in his lap, his eyes unfocused. The coffee in the paper cup beside him had long gone cold. A nurse walked by Grace Howard, tall, soft-spoken, and steady in a crisis. She paused when she saw him. "She's asking for you," Grace said gently. Jack looked up, surprised. "She didn't say much, but she asked if the man with the dog was still here." Jack stood, brushing dust from his jeans he didn't remember gathering. "Come on," Grace added. "She's awake now. Just take it slow." He nodded and followed. Inside the room, Emily stirred as the door creaked open. Her eyes fluttered. When they landed on Shadow, who lifted his head with a low, happy huff, something shifted in her face, small, delicate, like the petals of a frozen flower beginning to thaw. Jack stepped inside and crouched beside her bed. "Hey there," he said softly. "You remember me?" She nodded slowly. "You were in the barn," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves brushing glass. "I was," Jack replied. "You gave me a scare." She looked down at her hands. I was hiding. From what? She didn't answer. Shadow stood and walked to her bedside, placing one paw gently on the mattress. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing the fur at his neck, then curling into it like it was the only safe thing left in the world. I was cold, she said. I know, Jack whispered. But you're warm now. And safe. She looked at him again, eyes wide and serious. Is it okay if I stay here? Jack felt something catch in his throat. For as long as you need. Grace smiled from the doorway. She's still very weak, she said. We'll keep her here a few more days at least. Emily tugged lightly at Jack's sleeve. Are you the man who lives in the house with the trees? Jack blinked. Yeah, that's me. And the red barn? He nodded. She paused, then asked, Was it always empty? Jack hesitated. It was, until you came. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. That night, Jack sat with her until she fell asleep. Shadow curled at her feet, nose tucked under his tail. The room was quiet, but no longer lonely. The next morning, Emily had more color in her cheeks. A juice box sat on her nightstand, half finished. A nurse had braided her hair gently. It wasn't perfect, but it made her look a little less like a ghost. Dr. Logan Pierce came in during rounds. He checked her vitals, adjusted the IV, and gave Jack a nod. She's stronger today, he said. Still dehydrated, still underweight, but stable. She's not talking much, Jack noted. Doctor. Pierce glanced at Emily, who was focused on drawing shapes with her fingertip on the blanket. She's said a few things, the doctor replied. Enough to know she doesn't want to go back. Jack's stomach tightened. Back where? To a woman named Evelyn. She said, Mama Evelyn doesn't like me talking. She yells when I breathe too loud. Jack clenched his jaw. She mentioned her dad. Dr. Pierce nodded. She said he's a soldier. That he wears the green suit. Said he left a long time ago. She know where he went? No, she said. He said just a little while, but it's been forever. Jack looked over at Emily. Her hands were now buried in Shadow's fur. She ever mention her last name? Callahan, Dr. Pierce said. Same as yours. Jack's head snapped up. She said her name was Emily Callahan. Yes. Jack stared at the ceiling. Coincidence? Maybe. But the name hit like a shovel to the chest. Margaret's maiden name had been Callahan. Jack had taken it when they married, his way of honoring her. Emily, could she be connected? Or was fate just playing tricks again? Later that afternoon, Grace returned with a small tray, a muffin, some apple slices, and a note tucked under the napkin. She tried to write something, the nurse said. She didn't want me to read it. Jack unfolded the paper when Emily wasn't looking. The writing was shaky, barely legible. Dear Daddy, I miss you. I don't like her. I hide so she can't find me. I think she threw my bear away. I'm scared. Please come home. Love, Emily. Jack stared at the note for a long time. Her father, he muttered. We have to find him. I thought you might say that, Grace replied. Do you know anyone who can help? Jack nodded. An old friend. Served with me. Handles logistics for military family services now. Will he take your call? He'll take my call. That night, Jack stood outside in the hospital's courtyard, phone pressed to his ear. It rang twice before a gravel voice answered. Jack Callahan. Haven't heard from you since Sarajevo. Good to hear you too, Graham. Jack told him everything. About the barn, about the bruises, about the letter. What's the father's name? Graham asked. Graham Whitmore. That's all I know. I'll look into it. Sit tight. We'll bring her father home. Back in the room, Emily was asleep again. Shadow dozed beside her, breathing slow and deep. Jack sat nearby, watching them both. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting for something better, something beginning. Some dogs wag their tails for anyone. Shadow wasn't one of them. He wasn't a puppy anymore, and he had nothing left to prove. He'd spent most of his life sniffing out explosives and buried people in places where helicopters hummed overhead and fear slept in every shadow. Now he was old, his joints stiff, his muzzle grey, his ears slower to rise. But one instinct had never dulled. He knew when someone needed to be protected. And from the moment Emily Callahan opened her eyes in that hospital bed, Shadow never left her side. Jack Callahan came in each morning at 7 sharp, boots dusty, hair combed back like the soldier he used to be. In one hand, he always carried something small and orange, a colouring book. Once even a slice of his homemade apple pie wrapped in wax paper. But it was Shadow who arrived first. Every nurse at St. Mary's Hospital had gotten used to the old German shepherd padding through the halls like he belonged there. They stopped asking questions when he curled up under Emily's bed and refused to leave. Dr. Logan Pierce joked that Shadow had become her second IV. "He's got her on emotional drip," he said with a grin. "Constant companionship, high dosage." Emily didn't speak much at first, but she spoke to Shadow. Short words, gentle whispers. Sometimes just his name. Shadow. She'd say it when she woke, and again before she slept. She'd say it when she needed comfort, or when her fingers trembled at the sound of heels in the hallway. He'd look up, rise slowly, and rest his chin on the bed's edge. Always steady, always there. One afternoon, Jack walked in to find Emily sitting up, a colouring book on her lap, her small fingers wrapped around a stubby crayon. She looked up at him shyly. "I drew something." He pulled up a chair and leaned in. The picture was uneven, lines shaky and colours outside the borders, but the meaning was clear. A dog with big ears, long legs, and kind eyes. "That's Shadow," she said quietly. He smiled. "Looks just like him." She pointed to a stick figure next to the dog. "That's you," Jack blinked. "Me, really?" "You have a hat and pie," he laughed. "Well, that's pretty accurate." She didn't laugh, but a corner of her mouth twitched, a tiny, cautious thing, the beginnings of a smile. He folded the drawing carefully and slid it into his coat pocket like it was made of glass. "Think I'll hang this on the fridge," he said, "right next to my medal." By the end of the week, Emily was sitting up more often. She ate toast without being asked. She even asked for hot chocolate one night, which Grace, the night nurse, brought with extra marshmallows. Jack brought in an old storybook that had belonged to his late wife, Margaret. The cover was worn and the pages smelled like attic dust, but it had once comforted generations of children. He opened it beside Emily's bed. "Want to hear about the fox who lost his tail?" She nodded, pulling Shadow's ear closer like a teddy bear. He read slowly, voice steady and deep. Emily listened with wide eyes, one hand resting on Shadow's back, rising and falling with his breathing. When the story ended, she whispered, "I want to be a dog doctor." Jack paused. "A veterinarian?" She nodded. "I want to help animals, like you helped me." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You'd be real good at that." Outside the room, the nurses began calling Shadow Lily's Shadow. It wasn't just his name anymore, it was who he was. He stood guard at her door during blood draws. He followed her to physical therapy. He barked when someone rolled in a cart too loudly. But most of all, he listened. When Emily cried in her sleep, Shadow would nudge her awake with his nose. When she had a nightmare, he'd curl beside her and press close until her breathing slowed. No bark, no command. Just presence. And sometimes, that was everything. One evening, as the wind howled outside the windows and the first snow of February began to fall again, Emily sat up in bed holding a small slip of paper. Jack looked over from his chair. "What's that?" She hesitated, then unfolded it. It was another note, written in the same shaky handwriting. "Dear Daddy, I drew you and Shadow. I miss you. Are you coming home? She looked up at Jack. Will he ever come back? Jack paused. I think, if he knows where you are, he'll come. She nodded, like she wanted to believe that. Then she said, Shadow thinks so too. Jack glanced at the dog, who was now dozing near the heater vent, one ear flicking. Then we better believe him. He's usually right. The next morning, Emily stood for the first time without help. Only for a moment. But she did it. Doctor. Pierce praised her strength. Grace brought her stickers. Jack brought 2 muffins and a new pencil set. Shadow brought only himself, but Emily hugged his neck like he'd given her the world. Later that day, as Jack sat by her bed, folding a piece of paper into a sloppy origami dog, Emily leaned against his arm and whispered, Why do you come every day? Jack looked down at the paper creature in his hands. I guess, he said slowly, because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. Emily blinked. After my wife passed, he continued, the house got real quiet. I didn't think anyone would ever laugh there again. Then I found you. She said nothing, just leaned in a little closer. Jack didn't move. Shadow wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. In that quiet room, under soft lights and snow-paned windows, something unspoken bloomed. Not quite family. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of one. The morning sunlight crept gently through the blinds of room 208 at Saint-Saul. Mary's Hospital, casting quiet stripes across the white blanket where Emily Callahan sat cross-legged. Her hair was pulled into uneven pigtails, courtesy of Nurse Grace, and she wore a soft blue sweater someone had donated just last week. She looked stronger today, not just physically, though her cheeks had regained some color and her hands no longer trembled with every sip of juice, but emotionally, something had shifted, a glimmer of trust, a softness that came only when the world began to feel safe again. Jack Callahan sat in the armchair beside her bed, reading aloud from a book of fairy tales. Shadow, of course, was sprawled under the bed, tail thumping lazily every time Emily reached down to stroke his fur. It had become their routine. And for Jack, it was starting to feel less like visiting and more like coming home. But that morning, as Emily reached for her crayon box, a folded piece of paper slipped from beneath her blanket and fluttered to the floor. Jack bent down to pick it up. It was crumpled, soft from being held too long, the edges worn and creased. Across the front, in shaky handwriting, were the words, Dear Daddy, please come home, I'm scared. He glanced at Emily, who had frozen in place, a red crayon still clutched in her fingers. I was going to send it, she said softly, but I didn't have a stamp. Jack's heart clenched. He looked down at the page. The letter continued in broken, halting lines. I hide in the barn so she won't find me. She yells, she pushes. I miss you every day. Please come soon. At the bottom, love, Emily. Jack didn't say anything at first. He folded the paper with reverence, like it was something sacred, then slid it gently into his jacket pocket. That's okay, sweetheart, he said, his voice rough. We'll get it where it needs to go. That afternoon, Jack stepped out into the hospital courtyard. The wind had picked up, biting and sharp, scattering leaves across the stone walkway. He took a seat on the bench near the frozen fountain, pulled out his old flip phone, and scrolled to a name he hadn't touched in years. Graham Whitmore. He hit dial, 2 rings. Then a voice answered, deep, gruff, unmistakable. Jack Callahan, Graham said. Well, I'll be damned. Calling me before lunch, someone die or just close. Jack exhaled. I need your help. 15 minutes later, Jack had told him everything. About the barn, the pink dress, the bruises, the letter, about Emily. She says her dad's in the military, Jack explained. Wears the green suit. Left a long time ago. Never came back. What's her last name? Callahan.
Graham paused. You think she's family? Jack shook his head. Don't know.
But she's a child, and she's alone. That's all I need to know. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Graham said, Give me 24 hours. I'll dig. Back inside the hospital, Emily was curled up in bed, clutching the stuffed bear someone had found in a donation box. Shadow was asleep beside her, snoring gently. Jack walked to the window and looked out over the parking lot, then down at the letter in his hand. The words ran through his mind again. I hide so she won't find me, and he felt the familiar tightness rise in his chest, the kind he used to feel before a mission, before a breach, when the air got too quiet and the world held its breath. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, the old house creaking softly around him. A storm was coming, he could feel it in the walls. He pulled out a sheet of stationery, smooth and thick, the kind Margaret used to write thank you cards on. Then he began to write, To Corporal Graham Whitmore, my name is Jack Callahan. I'm a retired army sergeant living just outside Elhorn Ridge. 2 nights ago, I found your daughter, Emily, in my barn. She was cold, underfed, and too light for her age. She's safe now, recovering at St. Mary's Hospital. She misses you. She wrote you a letter but never had a way to send it. I've included it here. I don't know what happened to her mother, or what kind of woman Evelyn Blake is, but this little girl needs her father. Please, come home. I'll do what I can until then. Jack Callahan. He folded the letter carefully, slid Emily's note in with it, and sealed the envelope. Outside, the wind howled harder against the glass. The next morning, Shadow jumped into the truck without needing to be called. Jack drove into town, dropped the letter at the post office, and then picked up 2 muffins, 1 blueberry, 1 apple cinnamon for Emily. When he arrived at the hospital, Nurse Grace met him at the door. She's getting stronger, she said with a smile. Asked for hot cocoa with extra whipped cream. Jack smiled. She's got taste. Also, Grace added, she asked me if letters still work. Jack tilted his head. What did you say? I said yes, Grace said. But only when they're written with heart. Jack reached into his coat and handed her a small sheet of notebook paper. She might want to send this one too. Grace took it carefully and read the words, Dear Shadow, thank you for finding me. You're my best friend. Please don't leave. Love, Emily. Grace looked up, eyes misting. He won't, she said. Not ever. Later that evening, as Jack read aloud from the fairy tale book, Emily leaned her head against his arm. Did the letter go? She asked. Sure did. Do you think he'll get it? Jack paused. I think he's already on his way. She smiled just a little. Shadow thinks so too. And Jack believed it, because some letters never reach the post office. But they always reach the right heart. It was just after sunrise when Jack Callahan turned his truck back toward the barn. He hadn't stepped foot inside since the night he found Emily there, curled beneath moldy hay, barely breathing, wrapped in nothing but a thin pink dress and desperation. For days now, he'd been focused on helping her heal, on keeping her warm, fed, and smiling. But something kept gnawing at the edge of his thoughts, something he hadn't allowed himself to face. She didn't get into that barn by accident. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert as ever. His ears twitched with every bump in the road, every gust of wind. He hadn't left Jack's side since that night either, like he knew this wasn't over. As the truck rumbled to a stop in front of the old structure, Jack exhaled slowly and stepped out. The cold bit through his flannel. Frost glittered across the fields like shattered glass. The barn stood ahead, its roof sagging, its red paint almost entirely peeled away. A place meant for shelter, but filled with silence. He opened the door. The hinges groaned in protest. The air inside was dry and stale, thick with the scent of rot, dust, and time. But beneath it, Something else lingered, a child's scent. Sugar, dirt, and fear. Jack clicked on his flashlight and swept it across the floor. The hay was still scattered from when he first found her. But near the back wall, behind a stack of old lumber, something caught his eye. He crouched down and pulled back a faded tarp. A small stuffed bear. One ear was torn, the fur dirty, the button eyes scratched. He remembered Emily mentioning it once. Mama threw it away, said it smelled like mud. Jack stared at the bear a long moment, then picked it up gently. Beside it, he noticed the hay had been disturbed, pushed aside, flattened in places where a small body might have laid down for days. He turned and scanned the space again, this time more deliberately. Near the ladder to the loft, something glinted. He stepped closer, brushing away a handful of straw. A necklace. Tiny plastic beads on a stretchy pink cord. They spelled out a name. L-I-L. Jack held it in his palm. The E had snapped off. Emily, Lily, she must have gone by Lily before. Another piece of the puzzle. He tucked both the necklace and the bear into his coat. Then, just outside the back of the barn, something even more telling. Tire tracks. Not tractor tracks, not deep and wide. These were small, clean, recent car tires, maybe an SUV. And they hadn't been there the night he found her. Jack followed the faint prints to where they disappeared into the edge of the frost-bitten pasture. His breath clouded in front of him as his mind raced. Someone had driven her here, parked quietly, carried her into the barn, and left, not lost, not wandered. Abandoned. Shadow let out a low growl, barely a whisper, but Jack felt it in his bones. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the quiet field, heart pounding. Back at the house, he pulled out a dusty file box from the pantry. Inside were old names and numbers from his service years, former commanders, logistics officers, and one name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, Danielle Brooks. She'd once been a rookie deputy he mentored in the sheriff's youth program. Last he heard, she was still with the Elkhorn County Sheriff's Office, sharp as glass, and not afraid to rattle cages. He grabbed the phone. She picked up on the second ring. Deputy Brooks. Danielle, it's Jack Callahan. There was a pause. Jack, it's been a minute. I need you to come out to the ranch. I've got something you need to see. 30 minutes later, a grey sheriff's SUV rolled up the gravel drive. Danielle stepped out, bundled in a heavy padded coat, her badge clipped to the front, glasses fogged at the edges. She looked smaller than Jack remembered, but stood like she took up space. What have you got? Jack led her into the barn, showed her the bear, the necklace, and the tire tracks. She crouched beside the necklace, pulling out an evidence bag from her coat. Her gloved hands worked quickly. She's still at the hospital? She asked. Recovering. Safe for now. Danielle stood and gave a low whistle. This isn't just wandering. This is calculated. She said her stepmother's name is Evelyn Blake. Danielle's brow furrowed. I know that name. Yeah? Had a noise complaint out near her property last fall. She opened the door like we were wasting her time. Pretty, polished, cold. Jack nodded slowly. She said Evelyn yelled a lot. Said she hid in the barn so she wouldn't get pushed. Danielle's jaw tightened. You ready to give a statement? I'll give you everything. They stood under the arch of the old barn, boots crunching straw and silence. Jack told her about the first night, the pink dress, the letter, the way Emily flinched at loud voices and never asked for her mother. When he handed Danielle the bear and the letter with the missing E, she didn't speak for a long while. Finally, she looked up. This isn't just neglect, she said. This could be felony abandonment, psychological harm. If Evelyn knew she was out here and left her anyway, she needs to answer for it, Jack said firmly. Danielle nodded. I'll file it. I'll also contact Child Protective Services. They'll want to talk to you too.
Jack didn't flinch. Good. I've got nothing to hide. That evening, back at the hospital, Jack stepped into room 208 with Shadow close behind. Emily looked up from her coloring book, her eyes lighting up at the sight of them. "You're early," she said. "Shadow missed you," she giggled. "Shadow always misses me." Jack sat beside her and pulled out a new book. "This one's about a goose who wants to be a hawk." She wrinkled her nose. "That's silly. Not with those legs," he said. She laughed, the sound quick and soft, like music through snow. And for a moment, Jack let himself believe that everything was going to be okay. But deep down, he knew better. Some people go quiet because they're scared. Others go quiet because they're planning something. And Evelyn Blake hadn't made a sound. Yet. The courthouse in Elhorn Ridge wasn't grand. It was old brick and tired windows, squeezed between a closed-down bakery and a dentist's office that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 80s. But on that morning, it held the weight of something far greater than small-town routine. Inside, the air was thick with quiet tension, the kind of silence that sinks into your bones. Jack Callahan sat in the front row, suit jacket brushed and hat in hand. Next to him, little Emily sat in a soft blue sweater, legs swinging nervously above the floor. Shadow lay at their feet, still as stone, his eyes fixed on the door ahead like he was waiting for trouble. Emily's pink dress, the one she'd worn in the barn, had been carefully washed and folded, not to be worn again, but kept as evidence. A symbol of what she survived. At the front, Judge Helen Blake adjusted her glasses. Her hair was pulled into a tight grey bun, and her face held the expression of someone who had seen too many excuses, too many broken children, and not enough truth. On the other side of the courtroom sat Evelyn Blake, Emily's stepmother. She wore a beige cashmere coat over a white turtleneck and diamond earrings that sparkled beneath the courtroom lights. Her long blonde hair was perfectly curled, her posture impeccable. But her eyes, though polished, betrayed something cold and hollow. Her attorney, Curtis Vale, had slicked back hair and a moustache that curled just enough to look arrogant. He stood to speak. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted woman who made an honest mistake. She assumed the child was staying with a neighbor during the weekend in question." Judge Blake didn't blink. "A 6-year-old found unconscious in a barn. With bruises, with signs of exposure, and you call that a misunderstanding?" Vale coughed. "There was no malicious intent." "Sit down, Mr. Vale," the judge interrupted. The prosecution called their first witness, Nurse Grace Howard. She stepped forward in her navy scrubs, hand steady as she swore in. Her voice never wavered. "When Emily was brought in," she testified, "she was severely hypothermic, dehydrated, and underweight. She flinched at sudden movements and spoke in whispers. She told me she hid from her stepmother because of yelling and pushing." Gasps echoed from the back of the room. Jack looked at Emily. She clutched the hem of her sweater, not fully understanding every word, but sensing she was being spoken about. Next came Dr. Logan Pierce, the pediatrician. "Emily showed signs of prolonged emotional trauma," he said calmly, "old and new bruises. She wouldn't eat unless someone sat beside her. She feared adult women entering her room." The final witness was Jack himself. He walked to the stand slowly, shoulders broad, face lined by years of quiet service. He held the courtroom in silence as he spoke. "I found Emily in my barn," he said. "She wasn't wandering, she was placed there." "Left there." He described the letter, the necklace, the stuffed bear, the tire tracks. "And why did you bring her to the hospital?" the prosecutor asked. Jack looked at Evelyn. Her face didn't move. "She was a child," he said. "Alone. Scared, cold. I've seen what abandonment does. I wasn't about to let it happen again." The courtroom was still. Judge Blake scribbled something on her notepad, then looked up. "Evelyn Blake," she said, her voice like winter steel. You are hereby found guilty of reckless endangerment and child neglect. Your claims are unsupported by evidence, and your conduct shows a clear lack of concern for the child's well-being. Evelyn blinked, but said nothing. Effective immediately, all custodial rights to Emily Callahan are revoked. A pause. Until further review by Child Protective Services, Jack Callahan will serve as her temporary guardian. The gavel struck. Emily turned to Jack, eyes wide. Did we win? Jack bent down beside her. You're safe now, he whispered. That's what matters. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall again, soft, slow and quiet. Reporters tried to approach, but Jack waved them off. This wasn't a headline. It was a life. Back at the hospital, Emily climbed into bed with Shadow curled tightly at her feet. Jack sat beside her, a storybook in hand, but she reached out and stopped him. You stayed, she said. He looked at her, heart full. I always will. It happened just after lunch on a Wednesday. The sky over Elhorn Ridge was still grey with lingering snow clouds, but inside room 208 of St. Mary's Hospital, the light had begun to change. Emily was colouring quietly by the window, her feet dangling over the edge of the bed. Shadow, as always, lay at her feet, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the soft creaks of hallway footsteps. Jack Callahan sat in the reading chair, flipping through a worn book of animal stories, though neither of them had asked to be read to. Not today. Today felt different, thicker, like the room was waiting for something. And then came the knock. Soft, measured. Jack stood and opened the door slowly. The man on the other side looked like he had travelled across a continent and maybe a war zone to get there. He was tall, built like a Marine, with broad shoulders, a clean-shaven jaw peppered with exhaustion, and eyes the colour of stormed-over bronze. His uniform was still on, boots scuffed, coat damp with snow, American flag patch slightly faded. His face wore no expression, but his eyes were searching. Is she... he started, but the words caught in his throat. Jack nodded. She's safe. She's inside. The man stepped past him slowly, one trembling hand still gripping the strap of a duffel bag that hung off his shoulder. Emily looked up from her colouring book, her eyes unsure, curious, even cautious. Then he whispered, just loud enough for the air to carry it. Pumpkin? Emily froze. She blinked. Then her crayon dropped from her hand. Daddy, she whispered. In an instant, she was on her feet, stumbling forward, bare toes slapping the cold linoleum. Graham Whitmore dropped to his knees just in time to catch her. She collided with his chest, her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck, her face buried in the collar of his uniform. He held her like a lifeline. Like if he let go, the world would fall apart. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I didn't know. She didn't say anything, just sobbed into his shoulder, tiny fingers gripping the fabric like it was the only thing holding her to this earth. Jack turned away, giving them that moment. He rubbed at his eye and muttered something about dry hospital air. Shadow didn't move, just looked up at the man holding the girl and let out a low, satisfied breath, as if he too had been waiting for this. Later, once the tears had slowed and the IV machine had gone quiet again, the three of them sat together. Graham in the chair, Emily curled into his lap, and Jack leaning by the window with Shadow at his feet. She wrote you a letter, Jack said gently, reaching into his coat. Graham took the crumpled page with hands that shook. He read the words slowly, words written by a scared little girl hiding in a barn, words that were never mailed, but somehow still found their way home. He folded the paper with care and placed it inside his chest pocket, over his heart. I was deployed in Jordan, he said, voice rough. Limited comms. Evelyn sent occasional updates, said Emily was doing great school, drawing, piano. I trusted her. Jack didn't respond. Some truths didn't need commentary.
Graham looked up, steadier now. They told me what you did.
How you found her. What you've done since. Jack shrugged. She did most of the work.
Brave little thing. I owe you everything. Jack met his eyes. You don't owe me. You owe her your presence. Graham nodded slowly, holding his daughter closer. I plan to be here, from now on. That night, Emily didn't want to fall asleep. She clung to her father's hand like it might vanish in the dark. So Graham sat beside her bed, reading from the same old book Jack had used. Shadow lay between them, head resting on both their feet. And just before she drifted off, Emily whispered, "Can we go home tomorrow?" Graham looked to Jack, then back to her. "We're going to find a new home," he said, "one that's warm, one where you can laugh. One where you never have to hide again." Emily nodded sleepily. "And Shadow comes too?" "Shadow goes where you go," Jack said with a smile. Outside, the snow had finally stopped falling. The clouds thinned just enough to let moonlight touch the parking lot in silver. Inside, a little girl slept between the arms of two Menon who gave her life, the other who helped her live again. And in the stillness of that hospital room, something bigger than forgiveness took root. Family, not perfect, but finally whole. The snow hadn't quite melted, but the air had changed. It was softer now, less like a threat, more like a promise. In the mornings, icicles dripped steadily from rooftops. Birds returned to the edge of the trees, and in the field just outside Jack Callahan's ranch, two men stood side by side, looking at a crooked little house with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. "This it?" Graham asked, one eyebrow raised. Jack nodded. "It's not much." Graham smiled. "It's perfect." It had taken less than a week to find ITA fixer-upper just 2 miles down the road from Jack's land. It wasn't glamorous. The pipes groaned, the floors squeaked, and the wood stove in the living room coughed like an old man with a bad memory. But to Emily, it might as well have been a castle. The renovations started the next day. Jack brought tools, Graham brought muscle, Emily brought crayons and commentary. "Don't paint the kitchen blue," she said seriously, watching from the stairs with Shadow beside her. "Blue makes the toast taste weird." Graham blinked. "Is that a real thing?" "She's the expert," Jack chuckled. I'd listen. They settled on sage green. Soft, warm, friendly, just like everything they were building. Day by day, the house began to change. Graham fixed the front door so it didn't creak like a ghost every time the wind blew. Jack taught him how to seal the windows with old-school caulking. They replaced broken tiles, patched the roof, and installed a new swing in the backyard just under the tallest oak tree. Emily helped paint her own bedroom. Pink, of course, not baby pink, she insisted. Brave pink. Shadow supervised it all from his spot near the heater vent, his tail sweeping lazily across the floor. At the hospital, Emily continued her physical therapy, growing stronger with each visit. The nurses marveled at her transformation, how the hollow-eyed, silent girl had become a chatterbox with a fierce love of pancakes and dog-themed pajamas. Grace, the night nurse, brought her a journal and told her to start writing stories of her own. Doctor Pierce cleared her for discharge 2 weeks ahead of schedule. "Where are you off to now, superstar?" he asked as he removed her IV. Emily grinned. "To my new house. You like it?" "It has chickens," she said, "and a swing, and 2 dad-skinder, doctor." Pierce raised a brow, then smiled. "Sounds like you hit the jackpot." On move-in day, the sky was pale and clear. Emily wore a brand-new dress pink, of course, and carried her old stuffed bear under one arm. Jack had stitched the torn ear back in place, and Emily had drawn a red heart on its belly with permanent marker. Shadow rode in the truck bed, tail thumping against the side of the cab as they rolled down the familiar dirt road. When they pulled into the gravel driveway, Emily jumped out first, arms wide.
I live here now, she yelled into the wind. Graham caught up behind her. That's right. This is all yours. Jack stepped onto the porch, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other. You ready for pancakes? He called. Emily beamed. Only if I get syrup and whipped cream. Non-negotiable, Jack replied. That evening, they sat around the small kitchen table. Jack, Graham, Emily, and Shadow curled at their feet, the windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Laughter spilled out between bites of pancake and sips of hot chocolate. Emily leaned against Graham's arm. I want to plant flowers in the spring, she said. What kind? He asked. Ones that come back every year. Perennials, Jack said, tapping his mug. They're stubborn. Kind of like you. Emily grinned. I like things that stay, she whispered. Graham placed his hand over hers. So do we. Later that night, as the stars blinked overhead and the wind rustled through the trees, Jack stepped out onto the porch. He looked toward the field beyond, where the barn stood silhouetted against the moonlight, not so empty anymore. Inside the house, Emily slept soundly in her new bed, Shadow curled beside her. Graham sat in the living room, flipping through a photo album Jack had brought over, Margaret's handwriting still etched in the corners. They weren't just fixing a house. They were building a home. And this time, nothing and no one would be left behind. The first sign that spring was near wasn't the birdsong or the dripping icicles, it was the laughter. It started as a soft giggle echoing from the backyard swing, then a full-bodied laugh bursting through the kitchen window. It drifted down the gravel road, caught in the breeze like something long lost and newly found. Emily Callahan was laughing again. And not the polite, uncertain chuckles she gave in the hospital when someone asked if she wanted more juice. This was different. This was real. The kind of laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep, the kind a child gives when they finally feel safe. On a mild Thursday morning, Graham stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes shaped like dogs. He wasn't good at it. Most of them looked like melted snowmen, but Emily clapped like they were Michelin star creations. "Shadow pancakes," she announced. "This one's his tail." Jack leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, grinning behind the rim of his mug. Shadow, of course, sat in the corner, watching the ritual with quiet dignity. He didn't beg. He didn't whine. But when Emily snuck him a tiny piece under the table, his tail thumped once content. After breakfast, Emily tugged on her boots and ran outside with Shadow on her heels. The backyard, once frozen and silent, had turned into a tiny kingdom of possibility. The swing Jack had hung from the old oak tree creaked as she soared through the air, her pigtails flapping behind her like flags. Shadow sat beneath the tree, eyes trained on her, body still guardian and friend, always watching. Graham stepped onto the porch with a thermos of coffee and sat beside Jack, who had already claimed the old rocking chair. "You ever think this would happen?" Graham asked quietly. Jack shook his head. "I didn't think I'd hear that kind of joy again." "You gave her space to breathe," Graham said. "That matters." "You showed up when it counted," Jack replied. "That's what matters more." They didn't need to say much. Some understandings are too deep for words. Inside the house, Emily had begun decorating her room, not with expensive furniture or Pinterest-worthy paint, but with stories, drawings of Shadow, of Graham, of Jack. Stick figures with big smiles, trees with tire swings, a crooked little house with smoke curling from the chimney and hearts floating in the sky. She pinned every picture to her wall with tape and hope. One afternoon, Jack brought over a photo of Margaret, his late wife, a school teacher with warm eyes and a heart that never hardened. "This was someone special," he said. Emily studied the photo. "She looks kind." "She was," Jack said. "She would have liked you." Emily smiled. "Can I put her on my wall?" "Anywhere you want." So she did, right next to Shadow's drawing and a crayon sketch labeled "Dad Pancakes." Every evening became its own small ritual. Dinner together, a walk around the field, a bedtime story read by Graham or Jack, and Shadow always at her feet, always listening, always still. One night, after they'd finished a story about a fox and a runaway kite, Emily sat up in bed and asked, "Do you think Mama hears me now?" Graham's face softened. "I think if love works the way I believe it does, she never stopped." Emily nodded. She used to sing. "I don't remember the song, but I remember her voice." "Maybe we can sing one together sometime," Graham offered. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "Okay." "But only if Shadow sings too." They all laughed. Shadow gave a sleepy huff, which was good enough. In school, Emily began to thrive. Her teachers said she was shy at first, but curious especially about animals. When a classmate brought a lizard for show and tell, Emily was the only one who wanted to hold it. "I'm going to be a dog doctor," she declared. "And maybe a bear doctor too. Bears need hugs." On career day, Graham showed up in uniform. The kids gasped. Emily beamed. "That's my dad," she said proudly. "He came home, and Shadow. He became something of a legend. At school pickups, at town events, even at the grocery store, people recognized the old shepherd with the steady gaze and the limp in his back leg. "He saved a little girl," the neighbors would whisper. "Stayed with her all night." But Emily never let anyone say he was old. "He's not old," she'd say. "He's just wise." That spring, as flowers broke through thawed ground and tree buds painted the world green again, the Callahan house echoed with the sounds of childhood, running feet, barking, singing, and stories told in silly voices. The kind of sounds that rebuild hearts, the kind that rewrite endings. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a little girl with a pink dress folded in her closet, not because she needed it anymore, but because it reminded her how far she'd come, finally had the one thing every child deserves: a real beginning. It was late April when the tree behind the house finally bloomed. Tiny white blossoms unfurled like promises, each one trembling in the breeze that drifted across the pasture. From the swing Jack had built months ago, Emily tilted her face up toward the petals and smiled. "This is the tree from my drawing," she said. Graham stood nearby, rake in hand, sweat on his brow, watching his daughter as if she held the whole world in her arms. "Looks like it." "No," Emily said. "I mean, really." "This is it." Jack walked up behind them, carrying a basket of seed packets. He glanced at the tree, then at her. "You think dreams can show up like that?" Emily nodded. "Shadow thinks so too." The old dog lay beneath the swing, paws crossed, eyes closed, but they all knew he was listening. That evening, they planted a garden. Not a big one, just 2 raised beds behind the kitchen. Emily chose strawberries, tomatoes, and sunflowers as tall as Shadow. Jack added mint, because Margaret loved the smell, and Graham, ever practical, added carrots, in case someone brings home a rabbit. Emily laughed so hard she fell backward into the dirt. Shadow came to inspect the planting process. He approved every row with a sniff. "I think we're officially a team," Graham said, brushing dirt from his knees. "No," Jack corrected. "We're a family." They paused. No one had said it out loud before, but no one needed to question it now. A week later, Emily had her first sleepover with 2 puppies from the neighbor's litter. "Just for one night," Graham had warned. Jack smirked. "That's how I ended up with 3 goats once." Emily built a little bed for them at the foot of hers, but both puppies ended up curled around Shadow instead. The shepherd didn't mind. He blinked at Emily like he was used to being the center of the universe. "You're their grandpa now," Emily whispered to him. He thumped his tail once, approving. Spring rolled on like honey slow, warm, golden. Emily started school full-time. She made friends, drew rainbows on the sidewalk, built a birdhouse with Jack, and gave it a name: the Feather Hotel.
One Saturday morning, the mailbox held an envelope addressed to Emily Callahan in crayon handwriting. Inside was a certificate, Best Smile, in room 2B. "I didn't win for math," Emily said seriously, but this is better. Jack put it on the fridge. Graham took a photo. Shadow just blinked. And then came the final step. One afternoon, after the sun dipped low and the crickets began their evening chorus, a woman from Child Protective Services came by. Her name was Marianne, and she had kind eyes behind thick glasses and a folder labeled Callahan Emily. She spoke with Jack and Graham on the porch while Emily played catch with Shadow across the yard. "She's made remarkable progress," Marianne said. "And emotionally, she's thriving. She's stronger than any of us," Jack said. Marianne smiled. "We've reviewed everything. Your home, her schooling, the medical reports, the court proceedings." She paused, then closed the folder. "We'd like to finalize the guardianship with both of you." Graham's breath caught. "As co-guardians, as co-parents," she clarified. "Legally, emotionally, practically. You've built something here that many blood families never manage. We'd be honored to make it official." Jack looked out toward the yard, where Emily was now twirling in the grass, arms wide, shadows circling her like a planet around a sun. He nodded slowly. "Let's do it." The next week, they signed the papers. No ceremony. No flash, just a little girl, two men who loved her, and a dog who had heard her cry in the dark and never left her side. Emily signed her name with a flourish and added a tiny paw print next to it, drawn in pencil. "That's for Shadow," she explained. No one disagreed. That night, they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise like sparks into the twilight sky. The swing creaked gently behind them. The garden rustled in the breeze. Emily leaned against Graham's arm. Jack handed her a small package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was the old pink dress from the barn. Cleaned, repaired, pressed. "I thought you might want to keep it," Jack said. Emily didn't say anything. She just held it against her chest for a long time. "Not because you need to remember the bad," Jack added, "but because it proves you made it through." She nodded and whispered, "It reminds me how love found me." Graham placed a hand on her back. "And we're never letting go." And there, under a canopy of stars, in a house that had once been silent, a family sat together, not bound by blood, but by something stronger. Choice, loyalty, love, and a dog who proved that sometimes angels don't come with wings. Sometimes they come with fur, and they wait outside a barn door until you're ready to be found. Life has a way of mending what was once broken when love is patient and kindness dares to act. This story reminds us that family is not always defined by blood, but by the unwavering commitment we choose to give one another. In a world where so many feel forgotten or unseen, it only takes one person or even one loyal dog to change a life. Jack wasn't wealthy and Shadow wasn't young, but together they gave Emily something far more valuable than comfort. They gave her safety, belonging, and love without condition. For older adults, many of whom have witnessed both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit, this tale offers a gentle but powerful truth. It is never too late to build something meaningful, to offer compassion, or to step into the role of family, regardless of where you come from. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures, but in quiet acts of presence, a meal shared, a hand held, a home offered. Kindness, especially when it costs us something, is the closest thing to a miracle this world knows.